The camera never lies, they say. But people do. And sometimes, the most devastating betrayals happen when you're supposed to be capturing your happiest moments. Don't you dare move a muscle! This lighting is absolutely perfect! Those were the words echoing across the grand staircase of Thornfield Manor when my entire world came crashing down. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Let me start from the beginning, because this story, my story, needs to be told properly. Every excruciating, liberating detail of it. My name is Evangeline Ashworth Price, and until that crisp October morning, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the dutiful wife of a successful barrister, the devoted mother of 7-year-old twins, the perfect hostess who could organize a dinner party for 20 without breaking a sweat. I was the woman who made everyone else's life work seamlessly, who anticipated needs before they were voiced, who kept the family machinery running with quiet efficiency. What I didn't know was that I was also the woman whose husband was planning to destroy her life with surgical precision. The morning had started at dawn in our picture-perfect Cotswold cottage. I'd been awake since 5:30, pressing the children's coordinated outfits, checking the weather forecast obsessively, and running through my mental checklist of everything that needed to be flawless for the annual Ashworth family portrait. This wasn't just any photo session. It was a tradition stretching back 4 generations, a carefully choreographed display of family unity that would grace Christmas cards sent to judges, politicians, and society figures across the county. Rupert had been unusually helpful that morning, bringing me coffee without being asked, complimenting my emerald green dress, even helping Sebastian with his tie, while I wrestled Ophelia's unruly curls into submission. I remember thinking how lovely it was to see him making an effort, how perhaps we were finally emerging from the strange distance that had settled between us over the past months. How spectacularly, devastatingly naive I was. The drive through the golden Cotswold countryside had been pleasant too. Radio 4 playing softly, the children chattering excitedly about seeing their cousins, autumn leaves creating a carpet of fire beneath our wheels. Rupert had even reached over to squeeze my hand at one point, giving me that devastating smile that had made me fall in love with him 15 years ago at Cambridge. "You look absolutely radiant, darling," he'd said, his voice warm with what I'd mistaken for affection. The most beautiful woman in the county. I'd felt that familiar flutter of hope in my chest, the hope that maybe, just maybe, we were finding our way back to each other. Maybe the late nights at Chambers, the distracted conversations, the way he'd been pulling away from me physically and emotionally, were just a rough patch. Maybe today would mark a turning point. If only I'd known that his kindness was the cruelest manipulation of all. Thornfield Manor was everything Beatrice had promised. A magnificent Georgian estate that looked like it had stepped out of a period drama, complete with perfectly manicured gardens and that sweeping stone staircase where generations of aristocratic families had posed for portraits. The autumn light was spectacular, golden and warm, turning the honey-colored stone into something magical. The extended Ashworth clan was already gathering when we arrived. Beatrice, my formidable mother-in-law, resplendent in pearls and barely concealed disapproval, directing the proceedings like a general marshalling troops. Colonel James Ashworth, Rupert's father, distinguished in his regimental tie and perfectly polished shoes. Rupert's younger brother Nigel, with his wife Tabitha, and their 3-month-old daughter, Poppy. Sister-in-law Cordelia, with her husband Marcus and their twin boys, who immediately swept Ophelia and Sebastian into their chaotic orbit. The photographer, Imogen Hartwell, was everything you'd expect from someone who specialized in photographing the county's most prominent families. Discreetly professional, quietly efficient, with an artist's eye for capturing the perfect moment. She'd already set up her equipment and was orchestrating the complex logistics of getting 15 people arranged just so. "Right then, everyone," she called out in her crisp accent. "Let's start with the formal shots on the staircase. Children in front, please. Ophelia and Sebastian, you're here in the center. Adults in the middle tier, grandparents at the back. Perfect, absolutely perfect." I found myself positioned 2 steps down from Rupert, my handbag placed carefully beside me after I'd touched up my lipstick. The children were being remarkably well behaved, probably awed by the grandeur of their surroundings. Even baby Poppy was cooperating, gurgling contentedly in Tabitha's arms. "This is it," Beatrice announced with satisfaction. "The money shot that will grace our Christmas cards. 4 generations of Ashworth excellence." That's when Imogen called for everyone to freeze while she adjusted her lighting equipment. "Don't move a muscle," she instructed. "This lighting is absolutely perfect, but I need to make one small adjustment to my settings." We all dutifully held our poses. 15 people arranged in careful hierarchy on the ancient stone steps. Children trying not to fidget, adults maintaining their practiced smiles, everyone focused forward toward the camera. Everyone except me. You see, I've always been cursed, or blessed, depending on how you look at it, with hyper-awareness. Call it anxiety, call it intuition, call it the survival instinct of a woman who's learned that peace in her family usually means someone is hiding something explosive. From my position on the steps, I had a perfect view of my husband's profile, and something in my peripheral vision caught my attention. Rupert was moving, slowly, carefully, like someone defusing a bomb. His hand was sliding into the inside pocket of his navy blazer with the kind of deliberate precision that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Why was he moving when we'd all been told to stay absolutely still? What was so important that he'd risk ruining the shot Beatrice had been planning for months? I watched, transfixed, as he withdrew something small from his pocket. At first, I couldn't make out what it was, just a flash of color against the dark fabric of his jacket. Then he angled it slightly, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was a phone. But not his phone. I knew Rupert's phone intimately, the latest iPhone in that ridiculous gold case he was so proud of, the one he was constantly checking for messages from Chambers, the one that buzzed incessantly during family dinners with urgent work calls that couldn't wait. This phone was different, older, smaller, and it had a distinctive pink glittery case with a little charm dangling from the corner, a tiny silver heart that caught the morning light. I knew that phone. I'd seen it before, months ago, during one of our increasingly frequent arguments about Rupert's friendship with his secretary, Chloe Pemberton. The eager young woman fresh out of university who hung on his every word, who stayed late to help with complex cases, who laughed just a little too hard at his jokes during office parties. The phone I'd been told belonged to some random client who'd left it behind after a meeting when I'd questioned why Rupert had it in his possession. The phone that had mysteriously been returned to its owner the next day, never to be mentioned again. But here it was, in my husband's pocket, during our family portrait session. My heart began hammering so hard, I was certain everyone could hear it echoing off the manor's stone walls. What was Rupert doing with Chloe's phone? And why was he pulling it out now, when we were supposed to be creating the perfect family image? I watched in mounting horror as he glanced around quickly, checking to make sure no one was paying attention. His eyes skipped over me. After 12 years of marriage, I'd apparently become invisible to him in moments like this. Satisfied that he was unobserved, he began to move the phone toward my handbag. My handbag, which was sitting open beside me on the stone step, exactly where I'd placed it after touching up my lipstick moments before the photo session began. The realization hit me like a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs and making my vision blur at the edges. He was planting it. My husband, the father of my children, the man I'd trusted with my heart and my future, was deliberately planting evidence in my personal belongings. But why? What possible reason could he have for... And then, like puzzle pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity, I understood. The divorce papers. 3 weeks ago, I'd been looking for our insurance documents in Rupert's study when I'd stumbled across a manila folder hidden behind his law books. Inside were preliminary divorce papers that painted a picture so vicious, so calculated in its character assassination, that I'd actually gasped out loud reading them. According to those documents, I was an unstable wife, prone to emotional outbursts, an unfit mother who couldn't properly care for her children, a woman who'd been having an affair with multiple men and couldn't be trusted with custody or a fair financial settlement. I'd been so shocked, so blindsided by the accusations, that I'd carefully returned the papers to their hiding place and never mentioned finding them. Part of me had hoped they were just a worst-case scenario draft that would never see the light of day. Part of me had been terrified to confront what they meant about the state of my marriage. Now I understood exactly what they were, the foundation for a carefully constructed narrative that would leave me with nothing. And Chloe's phone? That was going to be the smoking gun? The irrefutable evidence of my infidelity that would make every ugly accusation in those papers seem credible. My husband wasn't just planning to divorce me. He was planning to destroy me so thoroughly that no judge would ever consider giving me custody of our children or a fair share of our assets. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which I processed the full scope of his betrayal, the calculated cruelty of his plan, the way he'd been manipulating me for months while setting up this elaborate frame job. Then the fury hit. Not the hot, explosive anger I might have expected, but something cold and crystalline and absolutely devastating. The kind of rage that comes from perfect clarity, from seeing your situation with laser-sharp focus and knowing exactly what needs to be done. Stop. The word erupted from my throat with enough force to make everyone on the staircase jolt in surprise. The carefully orchestrated family tableau dissolved instantly as 15 pairs of eyes turned toward me in confusion. Evangeline? Beatrice's voice carried that particular note of aristocratic disapproval she'd perfected over decades of looking down her nose at people. What on earth are you doing? We're in the middle of... I said stop! I was on my feet now, stepping completely out of position and destroying the shot Imogen had spent 20 minutes perfecting. Don't. Move. Another. Muscle. But I wasn't looking at Beatrice, or the confused family members, or even the startled photographer. My gaze was locked on my husband's face, and what I saw there confirmed every terrible suspicion that had crystallized in those 3 seconds of perfect understanding. Guilt. Panic. And a desperate, calculating look as he tried to figure out exactly how much I knew and how much damage control he was going to need to do. Darling, he said, and his voice was perfectly modulated, concerned, caring, just the right note of confusion. He was good at this, I'd give him that. Years of courtroom experience had taught him how to project sincerity even when caught red-handed. What's wrong? You look pale. Are you feeling unwell? Oh, I'm feeling many things right now, Rupert, I said, taking a step closer to him. I watched him instinctively try to close his jacket over the evidence, and that small, guilty gesture sent another surge of cold fury through my veins. But unwell isn't one of them. Enlightened, perhaps. Vindicated, definitely, but not unwell. The family was staring now, their confusion palpable. My father-in-law cleared his throat in that way military men do when confronted with a situation they don't understand but recognize as potentially explosive. The children were looking between their parents with wide, worried eyes. Even Imogen had lowered her camera, her professional instincts telling her that something far more dramatic than a family portrait was unfolding before her lens. Mummy! Ophelia's small voice cut through the tension like a knife. Are you and Daddy having a fight? Not a fight, sweetheart, I said, never taking my eyes off my husband's increasingly pale face. Mummy's just solving a mystery, a very interesting mystery about things that don't belong where they're supposed to be. Evangeline, Beatrice's voice had taken on a sharper edge. You're making a scene. Whatever this is about, surely it can wait until after we've finished the photograph. We've all taken time out of our busy schedules to be here, and... No? The word came out with finality that surprised even me. It absolutely cannot wait. Because if I wait even one more second, your son is going to complete his little magic trick, and then we'll all have to sit here and pretend to believe his story about how shocked and hurt he is to discover what his terrible wife has been hiding. The color was draining from Rupert's face like water from a broken dam. Evangeline, I don't know what you think you saw, but Don't. I held up my hand, and something in my voice made him stop mid-sentence. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending I didn't see exactly what I saw. Don't stand there in front of our children and your family and lie to my face. You've done enough of that already. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the distant sound of traffic on the country road beyond the manor's gates. 15 family members holding their breath, sensing they were witnessing something momentous, but not yet understanding what. Rupert's hand moved protectively to his jacket pocket, a gesture so unconsciously guilty it might as well have been a signed confession. "You're being paranoid," he said, but his voice had developed that high, tight quality it always got when he was cornered. "You're embarrassing yourself in front of everyone." "Am I?" I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, let's test that theory, shall we? Let's see who's really going to be embarrassed when we're done here." I held out my hand, palm up, fingers steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "Show them, Rupert. Show everyone what you were about to slip into my handbag when you thought no one was looking." The silence stretched like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. I could see Rupert's mind racing, weighing his options, calculating odds. Could he brazen this out? Could he turn this around somehow? Make me look like the unstable one? "This is ridiculous," he blustered, but even his courtroom training couldn't disguise the desperation creeping into his voice. "I don't have to prove anything to—" "Actually, you do." My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by the intoxicating power of truth. "Because right now, in front of our children and your family, and everyone we care about, you have exactly two choices. You can show them what's in your pocket voluntarily, or I can show them myself." "Evangeline, please." His voice cracked slightly. "Whatever you think you saw." "I know exactly what I saw," I interrupted. "The question is whether you're going to be honest about it, or whether I'm going to have to expose you myself." Before he could respond, before he could spin another lie or deflect with another manipulation, I lunged forward and grabbed the lapels of his jacket with both hands. The sound of his jacket buttons popping open seemed unnaturally loud in the morning air. For a split second, Rupert's hands flew up to stop me, but it was too late. Chloe's phone tumbled out of his pocket, like a guilty secret finally seeing daylight, bouncing off the stone steps with a series of sharp cracks before coming to rest at Cordelia's feet. The gasp that went up from the assembled family was audible even to the birds in the nearby oak trees. Someone, I think it was my sister-in-law, actually said, "Oh my God," loud enough for the entire county to hear. I bent down and picked up the phone, holding it aloft like evidence in a courtroom trial. The pink glittery case caught the autumn sunlight, that little silver heart charm swinging hypnotically as I turned to face the family. "Would anyone like to guess whose phone this is?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly in the shocked silence. "Anyone at all?" Rupert's mouth was opening and closing, like a fish gasping for air. The golden boy, the perfect son, the successful barrister who'd never lost a case in his entire career, was finally facing a situation he couldn't charm or manipulate or lawyer his way out of. "I can explain," he managed weakly. "Oh, please do," I said, warming to my theme now, feeling the intoxicating rush of righteous anger flowing through my veins like molten steel. "Please explain to our children, and your parents, and everyone who loves and trusts you, why you were carrying around your secretary's phone. Please explain why you were trying to hide it in my handbag during our family portrait. Please explain why you thought framing your own wife was a reasonable solution to whatever problem you're trying to solve." "Framing?" His voice rose almost to a squeak. "That's insane, Evangeline. I would never." "Wouldn't you?" I unlocked the phone with swift, sure movements. Of course I knew the passcode. I'd watched Chloe enter it dozens of times at office parties, had memorized those 4 digits without even meaning to during the endless social events where she'd hung on Rupert's every word while I played the dutiful wife in the background. The message thread that opened was exactly what I'd expected to find, and exactly what I dreaded seeing. Months of increasingly intimate exchanges, progression from professional courtesy to flirtation to explicit sexual content that made my stomach turn. "Would you like me to read some of these messages aloud, Rupert?" I asked, my voice steady despite the nuclear bomb going off in my chest. Because I have to say, they're quite illuminating, very detailed, very creative. The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to press against my eardrums. Rupert looked around desperately, searching for an ally, an escape route, any way out of the trap that was closing around him with inexorable precision. "You're Evangeline." His voice was pleading now, all pretense of innocence abandoned. "Please, not here, not in front of the children." "You should have thought about the children before you decided to destroy their mother's reputation," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze fire. "You should have thought about them before you started planning to take them away from me based on manufactured evidence." Beatrice stepped forward, her face a carefully controlled mask of fury and confusion. "What is the meaning of this? Rupert, what is she talking about? What's this about taking the children?" My husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, looked like he was about to be physically sick. The weight of his family's expectation, the shock of being caught so completely off guard, the dawning realization that his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. "I found the divorce papers, Rupert," I said quietly, but my voice carried clearly in the morning air. 3 weeks ago, hidden in your study behind your law books like some shameful secret, papers that paint me as an adulterous wife, an unfit mother, a woman who doesn't deserve custody of her own children or a fair share of the assets we built together. The family erupted. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once, voices overlapping in a cacophony of shock and confusion and outraged demands for explanation. Beatrice's voice rose above the chaos, sharp with disbelief. Cordelia was demanding to know if this was true. The children were looking around in bewilderment, understanding that something terrible was happening, but not grasping the full scope of the adult drama unfolding around them. "Enough!" Colonel James's military training showed as his voice cut through the noise, like a commanding officer bringing order to chaos. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the explosion of voices had been. He looked at his eldest son with disappointment so profound it was painful to witness. "Is this true, Rupert? Are you divorcing your wife?" Rupert straightened his shoulders, and for just a moment I caught a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The brilliant, confident young barrister who'd swept me off my feet with his intelligence and charm and seemingly unshakable integrity. "Yes, father," he said quietly. "I am." "And these accusations about framing Evangeline? About taking the children?" The pause that followed seemed to last forever. I could practically see the wheels turning in Rupert's head as he weighed his options, calculated the odds, tried to find some way to salvage this catastrophic situation. "I wasn't framing anyone," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was collecting evidence." "Evidence?" The bitter laugh that escaped my throat surprised even me. "Evidence of what, exactly?" "Of your affair," he said, the words coming out in a desperate rush. "With Jeremy Patterson from your book club. Don't try to deny it, Evangeline. I've seen the way you look at him, the way your whole face lights up when he texts you about some obscure piece of literature." The accusation was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that for a moment I couldn't speak. Jeremy Patterson was 73 years old, a retired Cambridge literature professor who'd been happily married to his husband Malcolm for 42 years. He was about as likely to have a heterosexual affair with me as I was to sprout wings and fly to the moon. "Are you actually insane?" I finally managed, my voice filled with genuine incredulity. "Jeremy Patterson? The man who exclusively reads Proust in the original French and grows prize-winning heritage roses? The man who's been devoted to Malcolm since before I was born?" "People aren't always what they seem," Rupert said defensively, but even he didn't sound convinced by his own words. "No," I agreed, my voice growing stronger with each word. They certainly aren't. For instance, I thought you were a faithful husband and devoted father. Instead, you're a lying, cheating manipulator who was planning to frame his own wife to avoid paying fair support and sharing custody of the children he supposedly loves. I held up Chloe's phone again, its pink case glittering accusingly in the autumn sunlight. Would you like me to read just one of these messages? Just to give everyone a small taste of your professional relationship with your secretary? Don't. His voice was desperate now, all pretense completely abandoned. Please, Evangeline, I'm begging you. But I was done protecting him. Done shielding his reputation at the expense of my own dignity. Done being the good wife who kept family secrets and maintained appearances while my husband systematically planned my destruction. I can't stop thinking about last night, I read aloud, my voice carrying clearly across the manor grounds. The way your hands felt on my skin, the way you whispered my name when you thought no one could hear. When can we be together again? When can you leave her and make this real? The sound that came from Beatrice might have been that of a wounded animal. Cordelia covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock and disgust. The children were looking around in confusion, clearly not understanding the explicit adult content, but sensing its devastating impact on the family around them. That message, I continued relentlessly, was sent 5 days ago, at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. While I was upstairs reading bedtime stories to our children and helping them with their prayers, my husband was downstairs sexting his secretary and planning our future together. Evangeline, stop! Rupert's voice broke completely. Please, I'm begging you. Why should I stop? I demanded, my voice rising with all the fury and pain and betrayal I'd been suppressing for months. You weren't planning to stop. You were planning to let me be branded as the cheater, the homewrecker, the unfit mother who broke up her own family. You were going to let our children grow up thinking their mummy was the villain in this story. I looked around at the assembled faces of the Ashworth family, some shocked, some disgusted, some carefully maintaining the kind of neutral expression that suggested they were already calculating how this scandal would affect their own social standing. I want you all to understand something, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. I have been a good wife to your son and brother. Not perfect, but good. I've supported Rupert's career, managed our household, raised our children, played the perfect barrister's wife at every dinner party and charity function and social event for 12 years. I've smiled and nodded and made small talk and never once complained about the long hours or the canceled holidays or the way his work always seemed to come before his family. My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by years of suppressed frustration and the intoxicating power of finally speaking my truth. And this. I gestured to the phone in my hand, to the wreckage of our family portrait, to the shocked faces surrounding us. This was going to be my reward. Public humiliation, the loss of my children, financial ruin based on manufactured evidence and outright lies. You absolute bastard, Cordelia breathed, her voice filled with disgusted disbelief. Your own wife, the mother of your children. It's not that simple, Rupert protested weakly, grasping for any argument that might salvage his position. Our marriage has been over for years. We barely talk anymore. We never. So you get a divorce like a civilized human being, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his excuses like a blade. You don't manufacture evidence to destroy your wife's life. You don't plot to take her children away based on lies and manipulation and planted phones. I need those children, he said suddenly, desperately, and the raw honesty of it was more devastating than any of his lies had been. Chloe doesn't want stepchildren. She's made that very clear. If I have full custody, I can send them to boarding school, arrange for them to spend holidays with you or my parents. It would be simpler for everyone involved. The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. He was talking about our babies. Beautiful, bright Ophelia and Sebastian, the lights of my life, The children I'd carried and birthed and loved with every fiber of my being, like they were inconvenient pets that needed to be efficiently rehomed. Simpler for everyone, I repeated slowly, testing the words like poison on my tongue. Except for the children who would lose their mother. Except for the wife who would be branded as an adulteress and unfit parent based on evidence you manufactured. Except for everyone who believes in truth and decency and basic human honor. I turned to Imogen, the photographer who'd been silently witnessing this spectacular family implosion, with the wide-eyed fascination of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. "I'm terribly sorry about the session," I said, my voice returning to something approaching normal conversational tones. "Obviously, we won't be needing that family portrait, after all." "Actually," Imogen said quietly, her professional composure never wavering despite the chaos she'd witnessed, "I think I might have gotten the shot after all." For a moment, I didn't understand what she meant. Then she turned her camera's display screen toward me, and I saw what she'd captured in that split second when everything had exploded into the open. It was the exact moment I'd grabbed Rupert's jacket, the moment the phone had tumbled from his pocket like evidence spilling from a burst dam. His face was a mask of guilt and panic and desperate calculation. My face was fierce with righteous anger and terrible understanding. And in the background, the rest of the family was frozen in various stages of shock and dawning realization. "Sometimes," Imogen said softly, her artist's eye recognizing the power of what she'd accidentally documented, "the most honest portraits are the ones where nobody's posing." I stared at that image, my marriage ending in real time, captured forever in high definition, and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. The last piece of my old life was falling away, making space for whatever came next. "Could I possibly get a copy of that?" I asked. "Of course," she said with a small, understanding smile. I turned back to face my husband one final time. This man who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my children, who'd promised to love and honor me, and had instead plotted my destruction with methodical precision. "I'll be staying at my sister's house for the time being," I said, my voice calm and clear and final. "The children will come with me naturally. You can see them once you've moved out of our house and found suitable accommodation. And Rupert?" He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, his face a map of devastation and shame. "If you even think about trying to fight me for custody after this spectacle, I will make sure that everyone, and I mean everyone, knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Your colleagues at Chambers, your clients, the members of your golf club, the parents at the children's school, every judge and magistrate in the county. Everyone." He nodded miserably, the fight completely gone out of him. I picked up my handbag, the same handbag he'd tried to plant evidence in just minutes before, and walked down the stone steps with my head held high and my spine straight. "Mummy?" Ophelia called after me, her small voice cutting through the shocked silence. "Where are you going?" I turned back to look at my beautiful daughter, my precious son, surrounded by the wreckage of what used to be our family, but somehow, impossibly, looking like they were going to be just fine. "I'm going to start over, sweetheart," I said, and for the first time in months, my smile was completely genuine. "And you're going to come with me." The immediate aftermath was exactly what you'd expect from a scandal of this magnitude, and yet nothing could have prepared me for the emotional whiplash of the days that followed. The drive to my sister Penelope's Georgian townhouse in Bath was a blur of tears and rage and a strange, euphoric sense of freedom that I'd never experienced before. I kept the radio off, needing the silence to process what had just happened, to begin wrapping my mind around the magnitude of Rupert's betrayal and my own spectacular response to it. My phone buzzed constantly during that hour-long drive. Calls from Cordelia, texts from various family members, probably Rupert himself trying to do damage control. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the feeling of the steering wheel beneath my hands and the knowledge that I was driving toward a new life I hadn't even begun to imagine yet. Penelope took one look at me when I pulled into her driveway and wordlessly opened her arms. She was 3 years older than me, a successful art therapist who'd been through her own messy divorce 5 years earlier, and the only person in the world who would ask no questions and simply offer sanctuary. "Wine or whiskey?" she asked when I'd finally stopped sobbing in her hallway. "Both," I managed through my tears. "Definitely both." Over the next several hours, fortified by alcohol and tissues and my sister's unwavering support, I told her everything. Not just about the phone and the attempted framing, but about the months of growing distance in my marriage, the subtle ways Rupert had been undermining my confidence, the gradual erosion of my sense of self that I'd been too close to see clearly. "He's been gaslighting you," Penelope said bluntly when I'd finished my story. "Classic narcissistic manipulation tactics, making you question your own perceptions, your own memories, your own worth, so that when he finally made his move, you'd be too confused and beaten down to fight back effectively." "But I did fight back," I said, surprised by the strength I'd found when it mattered most. "You magnificent woman," she said with fierce pride. "You absolutely did." "Daddy said you're having a holiday," he said, with the careful precision children use when they're testing the truthfulness of what adults have told them. "But this doesn't look like a holiday house." I knelt down to his level, taking his small hands in mine and looking directly into his eyes. "Daddy and I are having some very serious grown-up problems, darling, but I need you to understand that none of this is your fault, and no matter what happens between your father and me, I will always, always be your mummy, and I will always love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Are you getting divorced like Tommy's parents at school?" Ophelia asked, with the devastating directness that only 7-year-olds can manage. There was no point in lying to them. They were intelligent children, and they'd figure out the truth soon enough anyway. Better that it come from me, framed in love and reassurance, than whispered by classmates or overheard in adult conversations they weren't meant to hear. "Yes, sweetheart," I said gently. "Daddy and I are going to get divorced, but that doesn't mean we love you any less. Both of us love you more than anything else in the world, and that will never, ever change." "But if you love each other, why can't you stay together?" Sebastian asked, with the heartbreaking logic that children apply to situations that don't make sense to their ordered view of the world. "Sometimes," I said carefully, choosing my words with the precision of someone diffusing an emotional bomb, "love isn't enough to fix everything that's broken between two people. Sometimes grown-ups hurt each other so badly that they can't find their way back to being happy together. But our love for you will never change, never break, never go away." The legal proceedings that followed moved with surprising speed. When you have 15 witnesses to attempted evidence tampering, plus photographic documentation of the moment it was discovered, the opposing legal team tends to advise their client to settle rather than face the humiliation of a public trial. My solicitor, Victoria Pemberton, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in high-conflict divorces involving prominent families. She took one look at the evidence I'd brought her: Chloe's phone with its months of incriminating messages, Imogen's photograph of the moment everything exploded, witness statements from family members who'd seen the whole sordid affair unfold, and smiled with the satisfaction of someone who knew she was holding a royal flush. "He's absolutely fucked," she said with professional delight. "Pardon my language, but there's really no other way to put it. Attempting to frame your spouse for adultery while conducting your own affair is grounds for what we call a fault-based divorce with prejudice. You'll get everything you ask for: full custody, the marital home, substantial financial support, and his legal team will advise him not to contest any of it." She was right. Within 6 weeks, Rupert had agreed to every single demand we'd made. Full custody of the children with supervised visitation rights for him. The beautiful Cotswold cottage that had been our family home, along with its extensive gardens and all contents. A financial settlement that reflected both his substantial earning capacity as a senior barrister and the court's dim view of his attempted fraud. But the real transformation in my life began 3 months after that explosive family portrait session, when I answered a knock at my door to find Jeremy Patterson standing on my doorstep with an enormous bouquet of roses from his prize-winning garden. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said, looking slightly embarrassed by his own boldness. "But I was walking past and couldn't help but notice that you're committing what amounts to horticultural homicide on those poor climbing roses." I looked back at the tangled mess I'd made of the garden in my attempts to tidy up after moving back into the house. What had once been Rupert's pride and joy now looked like a botanical disaster zone. "I'm afraid I'm rather hopeless with plants," I admitted, accepting the gorgeous bouquet. "My ex-husband always handled the outdoor maintenance." Jeremy's expression softened with understanding. "Yes, I heard about the unfortunate business with young Rupert. Terrible affair, though I must say I'm rather honored to have played such an unwitting role in your liberation." "You heard about that?" I felt heat creeping up my neck, remembering Rupert's wild accusations about Jeremy and me. "My dear Evangeline," he said with gentle amusement, "you exposed a cheating barrister in front of half the county's social elite during what was supposed to be a family portrait session. Of course I heard about it. The story has achieved rather legendary status in certain circles." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I also heard about the accusations your husband made regarding our friendship. I do hope you know that I would never want to cause you any embarrassment or difficulty." "The only person who caused me embarrassment was my ex-husband," I said firmly. "Your friendship has been nothing but a bright spot during a very dark time." That was how it began. Jeremy would appear at my garden gate every few days with his well-worn tools and encyclopedic knowledge of horticulture, patiently teaching me the difference between pruning and butchering, between nurturing and neglecting. We'd work side by side in comfortable silence, or chat about books and current events and the children's adjustment to their new reality. The children adored him immediately. Jeremy had that rare gift of speaking to young people as individuals worthy of respect and genuine interest, rather than talking down to them or dismissing their thoughts as childish nonsense. He'd bring them carefully selected books from his extensive personal library, adventure stories for Sebastian, fairy tale collections for Ophelia, and he'd spend hours answering their endless questions about everything from the mechanics of photosynthesis to the historical accuracy of Disney movies. "Mr. Jeremy knows absolutely everything," Ophelia declared one afternoon after he'd helped her understand a particularly challenging passage in her reading assignment. "It's like having a walking encyclopedia, except one that brings biscuits and actually listens when you talk." Sebastian, who'd been struggling with his father's absence despite everything that had happened, seemed to flourish under Jeremy's patient, steady attention. They'd spend long weekend mornings in the garden together, Jeremy teaching him about soil composition and root systems, while Sebastian peppered him with questions about everything from why roses had thorns to how earthworms helped plants grow. "It's rather like armor," Jeremy explained one Saturday morning while I watched from the kitchen window, my heart doing strange, fluttering things in my chest. "The thorns protect the rose from creatures that might damage it without understanding its value. But someone who's gentle and careful, someone who truly appreciates beauty, can still enjoy the flower without getting hurt." He looked directly at me through the window when he said it, and I realized with startling clarity that we weren't really talking about roses anymore. It took me months to acknowledge what was happening between us, to admit that the warmth I felt when I saw his familiar figure at my garden gate was something deeper than gratitude or friendship. It took even longer to recognize that Jeremy might be feeling something similar, based on the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, or the way his fingers would linger when he handed me a cup of tea. The first time he kissed me was in the rose garden on a golden September evening, 6 months after that catastrophic family portrait session. We'd been working together to train a particularly stubborn climbing rose up the garden trellis, and when I'd stepped back to admire our handiwork, I'd found him watching me with an expression of such tender affection that it took my breath away. "Evangeline," he said quietly, and there was a question in his voice, in the way he stepped closer to me among the flowers we'd nurtured back to health together. "Yes," I said before he could ask it, because I was tired of being careful, tired of protecting myself from possibilities, tired of letting fear make my decisions for me. The kiss was gentle, respectful, everything my marriage had stopped being in its final years. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, and I could feel his smile in the gathering twilight. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I found you attempting to murder those innocent roses," he admitted with quiet laughter. "Only since then?" I teased, surprised by my own boldness. "I've been wanting you to do it since that book club meeting where you defended Emma Bovary's right to seek happiness, even if her methods were questionable." "Ah," he said, his eyes twinkling with delight. "A woman who appreciates both literary analysis and passionate gardening. How could any sensible man resist?" We were married 18 months later in that same rose garden, surrounded by close friends and the family members who mattered most. It wasn't the grand society wedding my first marriage had been. No cathedral, no 5-course reception, no formal announcement in the Times. Instead, it was intimate and joyful and absolutely perfect. Penelope stood as my matron of honor, openly weeping as she watched me pledge my life to a man who saw my strength as a gift rather than a threat. The children walked me down the garden path because, as Ophelia explained with 9-year-old logic, "We know you best, Mummy, and we want to make sure Mr. Jeremy promises to take proper care of you." Even some of the Ashworth family attended. Cordelia and Marcus, clearly emotional as they witnessed my second chance at happiness. Colonel James, who'd grown genuinely fond of Jeremy during their conversations about military history and classical literature. Even Beatrice made an appearance, though she spent most of the ceremony looking like she'd swallowed something particularly unpleasant. The most extraordinary moment came 6 months after our wedding, on what would have been my 15th anniversary with Rupert. I was in the garden with Jeremy, deadheading the late summer roses, when the children came running out of the house with expressions of barely contained excitement. "Mummy, Mr. Jeremy!" Ophelia called, practically bouncing with anticipation. "We have something very important to ask you." Sebastian, now 10 and trying to maintain some dignity, was grinning just as widely, but attempting to walk rather than run. "It's good news," he added, as if we might be worried about the nature of their announcement. "What sort of news?" Jeremy asked, setting down his secateurs and giving them his complete attention. "We've been talking," Ophelia began with the gravity of someone making a momentous announcement, "and we've decided something very important. We want you to adopt us," Sebastian said in a rush, the words tumbling out like water from a burst dam. "Properly, legally, so you can be our real father too, not just our stepfather." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Jeremy went very still beside me, his face cycling through surprise and joy, and something that might have been tears. "We know Daddy is still our biological father," Ophelia continued quickly, "and we love him even though he did terrible things. But you're the one who reads us stories and teaches us about gardening and helps with our homework. You're the one who comes to our school plays and remembers what we like for breakfast and makes Mummy laugh." "You've been our real father for ages," Sebastian added, with devastating simplicity. "We just want it to be official." Jeremy looked at me with eyes that were definitely filled with tears now, and I nodded through my own emotional response to their beautiful, generous request. "It would be the greatest honor of my life," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "If your mother agrees, and if you're absolutely certain, then yes. I would love to be your father in every way that matters." The legal process took several months, but by Christmas, it was official. Jeremy Patterson Ashworth was legally the father of Ophelia and Sebastian, and they were absolutely over the moon about their new hyphenated surname. "We're the Patterson Ashworths now," Ophelia announced to anyone who would listen. "It sounds very distinguished and important, don't you think?" 3 years have passed since that explosive family portrait session at Thornfield Manor. That photograph from Imogen still sits framed in Jeremy's study, next to our wedding pictures and school photos of the children and images of our prize-winning roses in full bloom. When visitors ask about it, puzzled by the obvious drama and chaos captured in that moment of revelation, I tell them the truth. That's the moment my real life began. Because it was. The moment I stopped being afraid of my own power, stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped accepting less than I deserved, that was when everything changed. The irony isn't lost on me that Rupert's paranoid accusations became a self-fulfilling prophecy. His attempt to frame me for an affair with Jeremy led directly to the most beautiful love story of my life. His lies about my character became the foundation for discovering my true strength. His plan to destroy me actually set me free to become the woman I was always meant to be. I sleep peacefully now, knowing I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly the people I'm meant to share my life with. The roses bloom more magnificently each year. The children are growing into confident, compassionate young people who know their worth and won't settle for less. Jeremy and I wake up every morning grateful for the love we've found and the family we've built together. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the best liberation. Sometimes losing everything gives you the courage to claim what was always yours: your truth, your dignity, your right to a love that doesn't require you to make yourself smaller to survive. The camera never lies, they say. That photograph captured the exact moment I chose truth over comfort, dignity over security, my children's future over my own fear of confrontation. It was the moment I became the woman I was always meant to be. Sometimes the universe has been writing a better story for you all along. You just have to be brave enough to let the old story end and trust that something beautiful is waiting to begin.